Welcome, Formicast fans, to another episode of Formicast Podcast, your source for everything ant keeping. I am your host, Durka, and with me is my co-host.
The colonialist, your wingman from the island across the pond, the UK.
No proclamation of Queen and Colony today? Wow, I'm surprised.
I was about to. I just got stumped, so I was getting tongue-tied. I thought I'd stop while I was ahead.
That's alright, that's alright. Third time is a charm. And today we have a special guest, Miles Maxcer. Say hello, bud.
Hey everybody.
All right, so before we get started with our awesome interview with our exciting guest, we have no new reviews and no shout outs for today's episode, which is okay. But before we go into the interview, we do have some weekly updates. Miles, do you have anything you would like to share with the community, or?
Sure. Just over here on the network side, we're working hard on new content, pushing that out here in the next couple of weeks. And we're just really excited for this season of anting. There's lots of cool stuff coming from us, and of course, the entire community of ant keeping creators is really kind of getting going for the season. So it's exciting to see that content starting to be pushed out.
Yeah, that's
I'd also real quickly like to share with everybody, I pretty recently committed to starting my PhD at the University of Florida with Dr. Andrea Lucky, so I'm very excited about that.
oh,
I think that's pretty much what I've got for updates for everybody, for at least this section of the podcast.
cool. That's very exciting. I'm very happy for you.
Congrats, man. That's awesome.
All right, so for myself, I noticed a lot of my queens started to show signs of workers, especially my chromatogasters and my Lasius neonigers. And then I actually noticed that my Formica species also has a couple workers. I noticed that like yesterday, which is pretty exciting. Fingers crossed I don't kill any of these on accident. So I gotta make sure I get some mini hertz or some other type of founding nests for them. But other than that, Formicast stuff is coming out soon. I just finished talking to someone at my job that sent in the logo to corporate, and it actually looks really nice. They did remove some of the color schemes on it and stuff like that, which is fine. They removed some of the yellows and some of the extra stuff on it, and they're gonna print it. We're gonna print it on a hat for me to wear, and most likely some type of T-shirt for me to wear around and see what the reaction of the community and see what everybody thinks about it. But other than that, what I got going on is I actually found a Camponatus pen, yeah, the Campbell pen, the Pennsylvania. I really suck at the names, but I had found one of those while I was at work, and I work with cleaning. I'm a custodian, and of course I had cleaning chemicals all over my hands and stuff like that, and I didn't really like realize it at that moment. I was like, shoot, I should have like washed my hands beforehand. But she was trying to fly away, and I noticed she probably either was she was trying to take her wings off or she was trying to fly away. And I was like, okay, I don't have any sampling files, I don't have any test tubes on me, but it's a carpenter ant, and it would be my first one. So I was thinking, I just kind of panicked, and I was like, okay, oh wait, I got a microfiber rag. So I took the clean microfiber rag, and she crawled on top of it, and then I like covered her up gently and then rushed her to the truck. And I'm sure people inside are probably wondering what this random dude from Cintas is doing with like he's like chasing something on the ground, because you can see me like like chasing this ant on the ground and stuff like that, and I like pick it up and I run to the truck, and I'm like, what do I got? What do I got? Oh, water bottles, quick! So I grab my water bottle, dump all the water out, and I take another rag and I put the rag down into the water bottle and I dry it up. And I'm like, okay. So I take the the microfiber with her in it, and I like just nudge her in. She goes into the water bottle, close it up, and I'm like, wait, I can't leave it in the truck because it's like 80, 90 degrees out. So she's probably going to like fry. So I'm like, okay, I'll take her with me, but I don't want people inside to see this ant queen, this carpenter ant queen, just sitting there in a water bottle. They might like freak out that she might get out and eat their wood, because people these days really think that carpenter ants eat wood. And so I'm like, okay, I got a perfect idea. I put her in the actual machine that I have. There's like a little hole area where I can put the bottle. And I was like, okay, so I took another rag and I tossed it on top. I was like, okay, she's in the dark and she's good. I take her home, and she completely, like, I put her inside of a test tube, which I didn't know this until before we started, but they don't necessarily like the actual setup for the test tube, because it's, I Miles, if you could explain that better for me, that would be awesome. For the test tube for Carpenter Queens.
Sure. Well, we just know that a lot of Nearctic Camponotus species don't do super well in captivity, period. And a lot of our attempts at founding them in test tubes haven't necessarily gone very well. Of course, every once in a while somebody is successful. But I definitely recommend a different sort of habitat for Camponotus, especially something like Camponotus modoc, Pennsylvanicus, Herculeanus, etc. And something like a mini hearth from Tar Heel ants tends to be a really good starting habitat for those species. It allows them to be near the water tower, which is giving them the humidity they need for their eggs and larvae, but they can also position their pupae in a warmer and drier place. And in terms of long-term kind of colony founding and then the next stages, those sorts of formicariums and starter formicaria tend to do better with those Camponotus species than test tubes.
Yep. Thank you for that awesome advice and knowledge. So yeah, that's probably what I end up doing. Is I'm going to get a mini hearth from Tar Heel ants. I have to get a couple other ones because I have a bunch of other ants that are starting to to do stuff. But yeah, so then the queen died for some reason, and one of my listeners on Instagram was like, "It's probably because the chemicals are in your hands and stuff like that." So at first I thought it was like a lack of oxygen, but that's not it. And then literally yesterday when I was coming back from my job and I was going back to the plant to clock out, I just see this other carpenter ant out of nowhere just walk across the sidewalk, and I'm like, well, today's my lucky day. So I took that one home, and she's fine. She's pulling on her cotton, but I know why now, so I'll take care of that as soon as possible. Also, I have a date today, which I'm super excited for that. So as soon as we're done here, that's what I'm going to be heading off to. And we're actually going to be going fishing, and I'm going to bring some Snapchat files and stuff, and we're actually going to go anting as well. So hopefully it cools down a bit because it is quite hot. So that's going to be fun. And then one last thing that I'm working on is actually a Michigan Ant Together. Going to be talking to a bunch of people, ant keepers that live in Michigan. We're actually going to do an anting together field trip somewhere in Michigan. Don't know where, but it's going to be fun. But that's all for me. JB, how about you?
Well, not much anting has been done, at least not much as I wish, because the little ones have had croup, which is a horrible kind of barky cough. She picked it up from nursery, so it's been all hands on deck with the kids really. But I have managed to find time to update the Polyacus dive setup. I've improved their logistics system by installing larger tubing, and I've put more vines around their setup to create better vine ways for them to move around. Pardon me. I've been filming the Cadole Noda colony as well from Ansaros, and I've moved them into the Wakushi MS 3.5 series nest, and I've attached the Venus nest as a mini outworld and feeding station as well. But I need to re-record the last week's video, which was the ultimate care guide to raisin messers, and that's because primarily the dog was snoring, and I was trying to talk quietly, so you could hear the dog snoring louder than you could hear me talking. So I didn't decide to release that, so I've got to redo that, and hopefully that's what I'll be doing after this episode is re-recording that while I've got a bit of time.
Nice.
And other than that, I've just been updating more on the website, so I've been working on the guides, which I've changed the name to Ant Guides now, and a few more blog posts are up. But that's pretty much me for the week.
That's exciting. Yeah, we need to sit down and figure out the Formicast site whenever we both get some time to sit down. But so yeah,
definitely, man. That's exciting to get started on.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of questions for Miles. I do have some stuff personally from me and JB. I think mainly most of the stuff that JB wanted to ask has already been asked. So I am just going to toss some questions at you, Miles, if that's okay. So the first question I want to ask you was, tell us the first time you encountered ants in the wild. I heard the story about you sitting on an ant nest. Please do tell that story.
I'd be happy to. I don't know that that's the first time I ever encountered ants, but it's definitely the most memorable. So I'm going to take you back to second grade, and I was never the most athletically gifted uh, child. So we were at recess, lunch recess, playing soccer, or at least sort of playing soccer, and I was kind of the last one picked for the team, and we had uneven teams. So I actually was just kind of sitting out on the grass, picking clover, looking at ladybugs while the other kids were playing. And eventually I started feeling kind of these pricks across my body, and then it got suddenly a lot more painful. And I noticed that I had ants all over me, and they were starting to bite and sting me. And what had happened is I had sat on some kind of myrmecine ant nest, and they were, of course, defending their territory, and they swarmed up my body. So as a second grader, I didn't fully understand what was going on. So I ran over to the playground supervisor in pain, and she could tell, he's covered in ants. Oh my gosh. So she very reasonably took basically all of my clothes off except for my underwear and started hitting me with my t-shirt to try and get all of the ants off because they had swarmed my body. Well, you can imagine a second grader doesn't necessarily fully understand what's going on there or that the teacher is trying to help them. So under attack by ants. I go to, the supervisor for help, and she starts hitting me with my own clothes as a whole bunch of other kids are kind of crowding around. And some of them are laughing. Others are definitely more concerned about my well-being. And basically, it was a relatively traumatic experience being attacked by ants and having all that going on. And kind of the humiliation of being in front of dozens, if not, I think hundreds probably, of students watching this happen to you. So my first kind of true interaction with ants was not exactly a positive one. I didn't like ants for a long time. And it took until sixth grade when one of our teachers gave us the assignment to learn more about something that we didn't like.
Hmm.
And essentially, it was spend a week learning about something that you kind of have decided you don't appreciate. And at the end of the week, you have two. You can either say you were wrong and here's why, or you can defend kind of your prejudice against that thing.
Hmm.
And I got an ant farm, one of those kind of green Uncle Milton ant farms,
Mm-hmm.
the typical kind. And it turns out ants are absolutely wicked cool. And I know I don't have to convince anybody listening to this particular podcast
Right.
of that fact, but more broadly, that's an interesting and kind of bizarre take. And I honestly have not looked back since. I've been working with and keeping ants ever since I got those ants in sixth grade.
That's exciting. What are the chances that I could come down and join you in the field for one day and just see what it's like?
The chances are pretty good eventually. I've gotten that request to me a very surprising number of times. There's a lot of people who are definitely interested in kind of being a part of it or at least seeing what it's like to do kind of the science side of things and also just kind of the camaraderie that goes along with hanging out with other ant people. So in the future, as I move to Florida and spend more time down here in Arizona, I will be thinking about more kind of formal ways that you might be able to meet up with members of the community. Because our communities tend to have a high proportion of people under the age of 18,
Mm-hmm.
I give a lot of thought to how to organize those in kind of the safest and most effective and most cost-effective ways.
Mm-hmm.
So on an individual basis, we might be able to make things work things out. But more broadly, I'm looking at ways that we can more formally organize the community, and I hope to have more on that for everybody, probably later this year, if not next spring.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, especially when you move to especially when you go to Florida. I have a friend of mine who actually just started ant keeping, and he lives in Florida, and he's like living on the road right now, and he decided he wants to keep Solenopsis invicta as his first colony. I told him that's not a great idea, but good luck to you.
Well, it's not a great idea, and it sounds potentially illegal. We can't be moving Solenopsis invicta outside of certain quarantine boundaries, which are usually set up around counties.
Oh,
So you're expected to never move that species outside of the county in which it was found
oh,
without prior authorization from the federal government and state agriculture agencies.
huh. Yeah, I had no idea about that. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to let
it's
him know.
highly invasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Solenopsis invicta is just a bad ant. It's not a very good ant to keep, and
Mm-hmm.
it's on the regulatory side of things, a difficult ant to deal with. So I honestly don't recommend hardly anybody keep Solenopsis invicta.
Yeah. Um.
As someone who keeps Solenopsis geminata, I agree.
Yeah. I was wanting to keep Solenopsis, but after a while, I was just like, after seeing your video, JB, I was like, yeah, I'll pass.
There's some hard lessons to learn with them. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of sort of understanding what you're getting into. So
Yeah,
I
for
always tell
sure.
everyone, do the research, really, really think about it.
Yeah.
There's many more enjoyable species to keep, I would say.
Well, the thing with my friend is he watches Ants Canada a whole lot, and I think he wants to do what Ants Canada does just because Ants Canada does it. So it's like, that's not a good. But anyway, we can go on to that later. But so, Miles, your CV is massive. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to go through it all. We could do a whole episode just on your CV if we could. But you have a lot, you have accomplished a lot so far. Is there something you look forward to studying or a dream to accomplish in the field?
That's an interesting question. I assume by in the field you mean in the field of myrmecology.
Yes, correct.
And what I'm looking at as I kind of embark on a new journey in my research career, essentially completing my PhD over the next couple of years with the University of Florida, my focus is going to be sort of twofold. One, it'll be on ant ecology. Exactly what I'll be working on with ant ecology, I'm not sure, though ant nest architecture is a very interesting topic to me. But I'm sure, just as every PhD project evolves, my focus and interest will evolve as well. Uh, and the other side of my PhD is more around science communication and science education.
Mm-hmm.
And that will likely involve the ant keeping community, and sometimes it won't involve that at all. But my focus for many years now has been trying to figure out how to communicate science in an effective way that not only helps people better understand science and appreciate the natural world, but also prepares us to better influence public policy because we know that the challenges of this century are largely scientific and they're largely environmental. If we look at the biodiversity crisis, the loss and the increase in the number of species that were considered endangered, we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at an
Some
extreme
scientists consider us
insect
looking for a mass
diversity
extinction.
crisis. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was saying some scientists consider us to be currently going through a mass extinction.
I I would say that the consensus at this point is that we're seeing uh, a mass extinction on a scary level, and we also are dealing with climate change, and finally a really disturbing, growing mistrust in science and the scientific process. So my focus is largely in trying to figure out how do we solve these problems, and I know that without the backing of the public
Hmm.
uh, it's going to be even harder. And we've seen that especially over the past 4 or 5 years. So part of my focus beyond ants, although I'll be using ants to accomplish a lot of this, is going to be on the science communication and science education side of things as well.
Okay. There was one thing, one of the projects you had did back in 2017 to spring 2020 about leaf cutting bees, the tiger beetles, and the captive rearing of tobacco hornworms. And then 4 year captive invertebrate rearing project of 60 plus ant species. So a couple of questions on that specific thing was, what was the reaction the bees had to the pesticide?
Sure. I believe we were doing permethrin trials at that point. And what we were trying to do is kind of come up with a risk analysis of using permethrin, which is an insecticide, around alfalfa leaf cutting bees, which is Megachile rotundata. And they are an incredibly important species in both the US and Canadian agriculture. So we just kind of wanted to see the impacts that those pesticides had. And what you do with LD50s and LC50s is you're trying to figure out kind of the lethal doses of those pesticides. So I was assisting with quite a few of those trials.
Interesting. For someone who doesn't understand scientific lingo, what does rearing mean?
So rearing, it is essentially captive care.
Okay.
So keeping live, I mean, anything really, under your care for an extended period of time. And generally, it also infers that there's going to be some sort of kind of change in life cycle. So with ants, it's really, you're keeping ant colonies for a long time. You're rearing them up. With other insects, it might mean breeding. It might just mean taking them from eggs to adult, etc. So captive rearing is just the process of keeping those animals alive and kind of moving them through their life cycle to the point at which you need to use them or study them.
That's cool. Out of the 60 plus species of ants, what was your favorite one to study? And do you have any funny stories or fun stories?
Ooh. Ah, the question of favorites has always tripped me up. Um, I'll say one of my favorites that I got to rear while I was in Montana was Manica hunteri, and they are a super kind of secretive, elusive ant species. Not very much is known about them. They probably are specialists on Formica,
Hmm.
uh, the black Formica, Fusca and Subcercia, etc. Um, and it appears that they probably predate on them fairly heavily.
Hmm.
I've seen Manica and Formica nesting under the same rocks quite often, which kind of creates more questions than it answers. And Manica often have Formica body parts kind of in their refuse piles, which is a good indicator that there's a lot of predation or at minimum a lot of fighting going on.
Hmm.
So they were really cool. They're like a much larger version of Myrmica. They're not very species rich. I think there's 3 or 4 species in the US, and I want to say 1 or 2 in Europe. So there's not that many Manica around, but the ones that are, they're usually fairly large, fairly colorful. They're pretty cool ants. Um, Definitely a genus that I enjoyed rearing while I was up there.
That's cool. So there's I have two questions. I'm going to put them together, kind of. How did the Ant Network come about, and will you ever write a book?
Okay. So the Ant Network originally began with a little bit of a different purpose, which was essentially to unite the ant keeping community with educators and researchers. And we still seek to do that, but our methodology is quite different than kind of the plan. So in 2014, I was accepted at the American Museum of Natural History's Ants of the Southwest course down here, actually a quarter mile from where I sit right now at the AMNH's Southwestern Research Station in Portal, Arizona. And at the research station, I got to meet up with a whole bunch of myrmecologists. Mr. I Love the Ants was there, other ant enthusiasts, who were primarily graduate students. And they accepted me while I was in high school. Unfortunately, they thought that I was a graduate student when I applied. Of course, I didn't try and trick them. They just misunderstood
Hmm.
kind of my status. And eventually, somebody figured out that like, oh shoot, this guy's like 15, 16, whatever it was. I don't remember.
Hmm.
And I was technically too young to join. The course is primarily designed for graduate students. So I ended up having to kind of get a hold of the board of directors for AMNH and saying, hey, I want to be a part of this field course. I feel like I should be a part of it. And I want, other people who are under 18 to be able to be a part of AMNH's field experiences. And they said, okay, they would amend the policy if kind of minors were accompanied by family members who are over 18. So my grandparents went down, and that course was like, I want to say 7 or 8 days, something like that. Met just the most phenomenal people. And coming out of that experience, 2 major things developed. One, I had the idea for the Ant Network and trying to figure out how can I kind of marry the ant keeping community, which I was such a deep part of at the time, with kind of the research community, which I was building all these connections with. And over time, the Ant Network has changed. We've now become more of a science communication company. We have 4 team members on our team. You've got myself as the director and kind of the front man. Ben is our media producer. Thomas is our financial manager. And Jen is many things for us. She's an accomplished scientist, but her role has been primarily graphic illustration. And what we do is we're trying to figure out how to most effectively tell compelling stories using ants. So not always about ants, but actually using ants as our ambassadors to the natural world. So we do that through physical exhibits for like children's museums. Right now, I'm assisting with a huge production of an absolutely massive zoo exhibit.
That's cool.
We also have worked with documentary crews and do films ourselves.
Hmm.
So we are still interested very much in working with educators, working with researchers and ant keepers, but kind of our approach to doing that has evolved over time. So I know you asked about writing a book,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure. I don't know that I've accomplished enough to say, okay, it's time to write a book, but there are a lot of different kind of creative exercises that I've thought through. And one of my mentors is Ray Mendez,
Mm-hmm.
and he is probably one of the most accomplished ant keepers in the world. And he's definitely the world's expert on basically building exhibits for insects or small animals for zoos and science centers, etc. And I'm fortunate to be working with him this summer on one of his last major builds. And I've always thought that a book kind of from his perspective and potentially from my perspective about ant keeping would be really cool, but I have yet to convince him of that fact.
That'd be really
Um,
cool, and I'd definitely read
at
it.
some point, the Ant Network is looking forward to producing more resources kind of in our series of Ant Keeping 101.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but we have to go where the audience is. And the audience for ant keeping generally aren't looking for books. They're looking for a little bit more kind of hands-on
Mm-hmm.
media, and that's where we try and meet them.
Yeah. So I'm gonna skip the question about the custodial work because I know you did that in the past. So I'm gonna go on to the next three questions, and then we'll go into the questions from the community. So you said on the Grubbing in the Filth podcast that every day you wake up and there's always something new to learn. To our listeners, do you have any advice for them, especially our new ant keepers are listening to us or watching your videos?
Sure. Well, so ant keeping is, from my point of view, a super exciting process because there's always something for you to learn about that process or about the animals that you're taking care of. But even more broadly, on a scientific standpoint, we know a fair amount about ants, but we also know that there is so much that we do not understand. And there's a lot of potential for ant keepers to really be making novel or new kind of contributions to our scientific understanding of how ant colonies work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that always excited me about keeping ants. And even as kind of an early career myrmecologist, I intend to continue keeping ants, even if my work doesn't always revolve around it.
Mm-hmm.
I find it to be incredibly fulfilling. One note of caution, I guess, that I would say is sometimes I see kind of in the newest crop of ant keepers, um, the thinking that they've learned everything they can about ant keeping in 2 or 3 weeks. And to be honest, I've been doing this 11 years and I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm.
So there is so much out there that is yet to be uncovered and yet to be kind of confirmed and understood. And to me, that's super motivating,
Mm-hmm.
right? That keeps me going and interested in it because there's always more to contribute and to uncover. And I hope that most of the community feels the same way.
Yeah. Um, so earlier I was mentioning Ants Canada. I want to know, especially the community probably wants to know, what is your opinion on Ants Canada, especially those who watch him and then want to begin ant keeping themselves? Do they go to him for advice through his videos? Whenever I get a new ant keeper, I always send them your way to the Ant Network, and because I know you can be trusted and you actually study them and care about them, don't do it for show or money.
So I generally dodge questions about Ants Canada for
Okay.
many good reasons.
Yes.
What I will say is that, well, I'll say a few things. Number one, I think Ants Canada overall has done a lot of good for ant keeping by kind of showing a whole group of people who would never have known about it, kind of some of the joys and the excitement of ant keeping. Now, the approach, I think anybody can guess. I don't always kind of approve of or appreciate. And Mikey and I have had a varied relationship over the years. Um, I will say that the Ant Network has sort of a different approach and a different commitment to teaching and to trying to inspire people to do things ethically and effectively. And honestly, one thing that we try really hard to do at the Ant Network is to let the ants kind of tell their stories and do it in an exciting way, but without creating any sort of fake drama. There's enough exciting real drama in the natural world that I don't feel the need to make anything artificial in that regard. I guess to kind of end my answer on this question, I'll say I think the ant keeping community understandably is frustrated with some of the approaches that Ants Canada has taken, but
Hmm.
we also need to appreciate the fact that they've been able to reach millions of people, and by and large, people know more good things about ants because Ants Canada exists.
Correct.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you aware of, or have you been aware of, the current sort of like media trends, more so in TikTok? So it's a newish sort of platform that I am into. Um, but the live feeding that's going on in there at the moment, it just seems to be going completely up the wall. People are live feeding larger and larger prey. I saw a scorpion being fed to a Fidole colony, a live scorpion, which I thought was quite sort of upsetting. What would be your thoughts on that? A few content creators have got together and there's now the hashtag we don't approve.
Hmm.
So is that something that you would consider sort of shouting out as well, or
I am not familiar with that movement, and frankly, I my approach would generally not be to endorse anything that I don't have a lot of knowledge about
Hmm.
or control over. What I will say is I
that's
have
fair enough?
seen a lot of those videos cropping up.
Hmm.
I have personally reached out to a number of those creators and asked them not to do that, and giving them kind of the perspective that I carry with the segment of the community that I tend to represent.
Yep.
And much to my dismay, that's been generally ineffective.
Hmm.
And it has been disheartening to see people prioritize getting views or I may be in my early 20s, but I'll tell you, I feel like I'm 47. I don't understand how TikTok works, but
Hmm.
what I will say is it's not worth abusing animals to try and get attention.
Yep.
And I don't approve of uh, a lot of the live feeding practices that I have been seeing there. And I guess that's what I can say about that.
Yeah. JB, did you read down the questions we had from the community? Because that was literally one of the questions I had for him.
Oh, I missed that one. Sorry, like I said, every question that I thought of has already been asked.
Right. That's all
That's why I
right.
just thought I'd check. But sorry, I apologize, I missed that one.
You're fine. The last question I had, JB kind of wrote it in and answered it for me. But it's actually one of the when I started getting ants and started ant keeping myself, I was like, okay, I need some tools. I need something. I need to like figure out how to, collect ants and stuff. And one thing I realized was an aspirator. So I was like, okay, I went on YouTube and I'm like, okay, what's an aspirator? And that's the video I found where I saw your when I saw your one of your videos on YouTube was about the aspirator, which is kind of recently I went on a camping trip and I had an aspirator from Portmore Art and I actually ended up like sucking in formic acid while I was getting these ants. So I was gonna ask you how to use an aspirator, but there's a way that I saw you on your video, and then JB kind of answered it in the show notes. But
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
I
one
see.
of the biggest mistakes people make with aspirators is they don't use a filter.
mm,
And even if you're not aspirating something with formic acid, a filter is there to protect your lungs from fungus spores. If it's a HEPA filter, that is, some fungus spores can travel through other ones.
yeah,
But at the very least, it helps as another barrier, a line of defense. So if anybody has questions about aspirators, I think the video on the network that we did on them was pretty thorough in trying to answer those kinds of questions and prepare folks on how to use it.
Correct. Yep. All right. So we got questions from the community, quite a lot of questions. So we will definitely try to hurry this up. You have a time crunch here. So let's go. The first one we had was from Exalti. He said, first of all, I am a big fan. What ants do you keep and which colony is your favorite?
Well, we definitely don't have time for all of the ants that I keep, or at least have kept over the years. I have a few favorites. My current favorite is a Myrmecocystis mexicanus colony. So those are the kind of yellow honeypot ants, the nocturnal ones. And I was actually able to find two queens that were digging down, creating a colostral chamber together, kept them, and for almost a year now, they've actually been good. They've formed kind of a two queen colony, and that's my current favorite. I'm down in Arizona right now, so I am limited to the ants of Arizona. Luckily, Arizona is the best state in the United States for ants, at least in terms of ant diversity and kind of a diversity of different kinds of ants with different natural histories. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. I will also just give a quick shout out to trapjaw ants. Now, I've never kept them successfully, but I find them pretty inspiring. It's something that I really want to do in the future. And fans of the Ant Network from previous years may remember that our old logo actually was the head of Adonomachus clarus, which is the desert trapjaw ant.
That's really cool. I don't know how you pronounce their names so well. I butcher them all the time.
Lots of experience and screwing up.
Yep.
And by the way, we're dealing with Latin, right? So this is a dead language. Technically, there aren't really totally wrong answers, but even among myrmecologists, there are disagreements about pronunciation.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it all differs with dialect, really.
Yeah.
It does.
So I got two questions from one of our listeners. Kitash, Quatschsch. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your username. What challenges does the field of myrmecology face when studying ants from an academic angle that may not be apparent to us hobby ant keepers?
That's an interesting question, kind of a difficult one, frankly. Ant keepers, and I say this as an ant keeper, don't always understand the scientific process, and through no fault of their own. So sometimes we think that we can draw broader, bigger conclusions about ants and their biology or their behavior based on our observations in captivity. So it's important for ant keepers to understand that the way in which we, on a scientific basis, describe those things is a lot more thorough, and we tend to be more conservative in kind of how we're able to kind of discuss and record our findings. So as an ant keeper, I might be able to tell you that, in my opinion, test tubes don't work very well. But as a scientist, I got to say we need more data. So there's just different approaches to ant keeping, or questions that ant keepers might have, I guess, about ants. So if I put my ant keeper hat on, I can talk a little bit differently than if I have my myrmecologist hat on. I would say that the challenges that myrmecologists face is generally a matter of resources. There's only so many myrmecologists, only so many kind of questions can be looked at once, and we have to prioritize. So, fully, thoroughly understanding the ant kind of biogeography and diversity of a certain state or something is really cool, and it just may not be something that anybody is able to do. So maybe hypothetically you're sitting in Minnesota and you're like, man, I wish the ant fauna of the state was better described. What are the myrmecologists doing? It's like, well, there's not that many of us, and we're working on other things. So ant keepers should understand, and I know it's frustrating, but kind of be patient, that myrmecologists don't have all the time and resources in the world, although we definitely wish that we did.
Right. The next question we have from him is, are you a fan of Jeremy Wade? Because the intro to your Ant Explorer videos is very similar to the intro to the show River Monsters.
There was at least one or two, I think, intros to the Ant Explorer that we did that were definitely inspired by River Monsters. I'd say our whole team has an appreciation for Jeremy Wade, and and his approach to storytelling and kind of exploring the natural world. And obviously, there's a lot of drama there, but I think that by and large, River Monsters has done a pretty good job of ultimately kind of reflecting the true nature of the animals that they're demonstrating. So I would say yes, we're fans, and the intro, or at least one of the intros, has been inspired. Although we definitely try and take inspiration from multiple sources and from our own kind of creative creative hats, if you will.
That's cool. Kale keeps ants. He's the guy who actually gave me the name idea for Formicast. He wants to know, what is the most interesting thing you study as a myrmecologist?
Hmm. Well, it's a good question. I feel like it's a little premature. So, a year or two from now, I might have a really good answer on that.
Hmm.
But what I'll say is that I'm particularly interested in the role of ant colonies in the ecosystem. And that's basically ant ecology
Hmm.
broadly. If you want to get really specific, I am particularly interested in trapjaw ants and kind of the roles they play, and also how their presence kind of in the ecosystem affects it. And it's one area that is not super thoroughly understood, at least for the places of the world that has trapjaw ants, um, that are not super easily accessible.
Hmm.
I'll also add on, I had the privilege to work with California Academy of Sciences and North Carolina State University and the National Science Foundation to be a part of a research expedition in Madagascar. And we actually went into the canopies of the island's dry forests, and we got to learn more about, and nobody's ever done this before, right? We got to learn more about the ants that live in the dry forest there. And that was it was an incredible privilege, I guess, to be a part of that research team and to discover ants up there that we just didn't know were there. And I was able to actually find a colony of Melissa tarsus. And if your listeners aren't familiar, Melissa tarsus are silk spinning ants. They have weird, like modified legs. They
Oh, wow.
live in the live bark of these trees with hemipterans that are symbiotic. So they're a really special, unique ant that actually cannot realistically be kept in captivity. I'm pretty sure we actually talk about Melissa tarsus in one of the Ant Network's Q&A videos. So if you want to
Oh,
learn more about them, check those out. I regret that I don't know if it was Q&A number 1 or 2, so I guess you have to watch both.
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that later. Um, Now that you're in Arizona, what species do you plan on keeping this year? That's from Lice Camera Ants.
Great question. One of the species, you might be able to guess this, Odonomachus clarus, the desert trapjaw ants, is one that I'm definitely targeting this year, along with Pseudomyrmex apache,
Hmm.
which is a really beautiful orange Pseudomyrmex species here. And they actually are present right along with a species called Camponotus schaeferi, which is it's like a bright orange, little bit red in it, arboreal Camponotus species. They look a little bit like Camponotus castaneus, and they are essentially limited to these kind of sky island mountains here in southeastern Arizona in that region. So they're really cool. So I guess my answer is going to be kind of threefold. It's going to be the trapjaw ants, Pseudomyrmex apache, and then Camponotus schaefer. I'm really excited to find them. Now, keeping them is going to be a whole different ball game, but I'm going to do my best.
That's cool. So we're really crunched on time. Stein did ask a whole bunch of questions, but you already kind of answered most of them. Um, so I'm gonna actually ask one of his questions, and it is, what's the best substrate for ants that you can buy on the internet?
I'm not sure exactly what they mean by substrate, at least in the context of it being used. Coconut fiber tends to be a fairly good one if you sift out the big long fibers and stuff, and you get kind of the coarse material.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in terms of just like overall supplies for like vivarium type stuff, I trust Josh's Frogs
Mm-hmm.
as a really good supplier, and they have quite a few different substrates and plants and cork bark and manzanita and the kind of stuff that you might need if you're setting up a substrate based kind of vivarium. So shout out to Josh's Frogs for being great about that and making sure there's no, harmful pesticides or chemicals or anything involved.
Yeah. So when it comes to my carpenter ant, then you said for me to put some substrate in there until I get the mini hearth. Like what do I put in there?
Sure. Some kind of quartz sand that's been washed can be really good. Um, let's see, a little bit of sphagnum moss would be fine. Um, or you could go with like, the coconut fiber material. There's quite a few different options, I guess. Giving
Okay.
them some sort of substrate tends to really help, though. So really, thoroughly washed sand
Okay.
would probably be just fine.
That's cool. I got a bunch of sand in the backyard. That'll work. Let's see. So we have a question from Niles. As a myrmecologist, what does a normal day look like to you, and what do you do?
Mm. I'm going to answer that both as a myrmecologist and as the director of the ant network because I can't separate the two things in terms of my day. There's a lot of overlap. Um, One of the benefits, I guess, to being a field biologist is that most days don't look the same. Um, a lot of the time I spend is going to be kind of if I'm on site, like in the field doing work, there's a lot of prep work that's involved, but otherwise you're executing on the research plan. So you're actually out there making the collections or observations, what have you. On the ant network side of things, a day to day could have anything to do with, I might be shooting a video, it might be editing a script, working on other projects I can't talk about right now, but really excited to share with everyone. I might be doing plans for a potential zoo exhibit or an exhibit for a university. I might be here working on the zoo exhibit or a documentary. So the day to day that I am involved with tends to vary a lot. Now, when I'm at a more formal academic institution, as I will be in the fall, or as I was when I was at Montana State University, my day to day is more lab based, and
Hmm.
that's going to have more to do with making sure the lab is well run. We're doing experiments on time, et cetera. So I guess kind of the time of year has a big impact on how my time is spent and then what I'm doing. So I'm going to be a PhD student. That's going to be a different kind of dynamic than I have right now when I'm primarily focused on engaging with ant keepers, making content, and primarily at this point working on live insect exhibits.
That's cool. Logic had actually a really weird question, but he wants to know: do you like chimpanzees?
I've always found primates to be a little bit unnerving, but they're very cool. I'm a huge fan of animals in general.
Hmm.
And I have traveled the world in search of animals. So chimpanzees, I guess I'm a fan of, although some of the behaviors that chimps and bonobos, their close relatives, engage with can be a little bit disturbing to humans, but definitely educational
Hmm.
when it comes to just primate behavior. So yes, sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's probably a couple questions that are just trolling you questions. So actually, one of the questions we had also is from Thomas Copel. Do you know at least three European camponatus which aren't Lignaperda?
Interesting. This is probably a remnant of my playful attacks on the European anti-diversity in the ant tier list video, which I still hear about. It's incredible how many folks did not see the humor in that one, but hopefully Tomas did. What I will say, so we've got three European Camponotus. Let's go with Vegas or Vagus, I'm not entirely sure. Herculeanus, um, Ligniperda, and then I think it's Barbaricus, something like that,
Hmm.
is another species there. I think they're in the Mediterranean, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
Um, so there you go. That's my best guess for
I've
a couple
noticed
Camponotus
Paris as
species.
well.
Yeah.
So
Um. So aesthetic ants did want to know your thoughts on the "We Don't Approve" movement, but since JB already asked that question, basically to kind of kind of tell you what it's kind of about. So it's against gel farms, live feeding. There was something else. I don't remember what the other thing was. But then the other thing that I'm totally against is illegal sale of ants, especially in the United States. That's been going up like crazy too. Um, but that's just to like kind of give you a heads up on that. But we do have a couple more questions from Aesthetic Ants, and I think we got two more questions after that, and then that's probably all the time we got for you, or that's all the time you got for us. Do you think it's responsible to dig up ant colonies?
I get this question all the time. I dig up ant colonies, but to be honest with you, those decisions are based in a lot of kind of experience and evaluation.
Mm.
I hate to do this again, but one of our Q&A videos, it's one or two, actually goes into this topic. We got a question from the community, and I discussed kind of the different factors that come to mind when you're thinking about excavating an ant colony. And I can briefly go over those, but I'd refer your listeners back to those videos if they are particularly interested in kind of understanding the process that they should go through. Um, Broadly, if you're able to get a hold of queen ants and start colonies that way, that's going to be a more reliable method.
Mm-hmm.
They just tend to do better because the colonies are used to captivity. Sometimes you have certain colonies or even just species in general that do not adapt well to captivity. With all due respect to folks, you might have a lot of experience ant keeping, but if you don't have a ton of experience understanding where ants are in the environment, what your likelihood of getting a queen of a certain kind of ant is. There's a lot of factors, I guess, that go into excavating or removing an established colony.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend people try and start their colonies with queens. Every once in a while, you're presented with, oh, I flipped a rock and there was the queen and the brood and all the workers, and I just used my aspirator and I got them moved into a formicarium right away. That's probably good. It may fail with some species, but that's a pretty decent scenario. What I will say is it is not responsible to collect ant colonies that you don't have the capacity to care for.
Mm.
And a appropriate answer to that kind of the question that naturally poses is like, well, I have a Tupperware and a bunch of test tubes. Doesn't that count? And the answer is no, that doesn't count. Especially if you're taking a colony from the environment, you need to provide them with a very good formicarium, something that's going to effectively function and replicate their nest.
That's cool.
So if you're unable to do that, you cannot, in my opinion, and in the opinion of mentors and other folks that I know, you can't responsibly colony if you cannot reasonably take care of one.
Yeah.
That's 110% what I stand by as well.
Mm-hmm. Again, I'm gonna take two questions and put them together. What's the biggest difference between ant keeping in the United States or in America and Europe? And when will you be uploading another video to YouTube?
Okay. Those are very different questions.
Correct.
It's kind of like taking questions at the White House.
Right.
Here's what I'll say. The biggest difference between ant keeping in the United States and Europe is obviously the regulatory environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have different laws and honestly different ecological situations than Europe, or at least lots of Europe. So ant keeping and the whole dynamic of ant acquisition is different. So that's the biggest difference. Another one that I'll just bring up is the availability of materials. So in Europe, you have greater availability of white-hawk or autoclaved aerated concrete, which is very consistently used by Europeans as a nesting medium. The United States, that's pretty rare. There's a couple companies. I think there's one in Florida, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of availability of white-hawk or AAC.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have a greater accessibility to gypsum-based plaster materials. Mm-hmm. So, hydrostone, hydrocal, etc. And I will say, when I started out in ant keeping in like 2009, 2010, those materials were pretty poorly known. Really, it was Ray and a few others that were kind of figuring this stuff out, and that was leaking to the community, and we were figuring things out. But when I started ant keeping, most ant keepers were using plaster of Paris and test tubes in Tupperwares, and really trying to pull together some kind of janky, some janky setups. And I do want to address one thing. I've had a lot of folks who feel that I am against kind of DIY ant keeping, and I really feel strongly that that's not the case. And the Ant Network has a number of tutorials on how to kind of DIY your own formicariums, and
Yep.
we look forward to kind of expanding that library. What I am against is doing things that aren't going to work.
Hmm.
And I have strong opinions about test tubes. I've had them for a long time, but they come out of experience and observation.
Hmm.
So I feel pretty strongly that test tubes are not ideal environments for a lot of ants that we try and keep in them. So then we
Hmm.
say, oh, those ants don't do well in captivity. It's like, no, those ants don't do well using the methods that you've been trying.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say that broadly, ant keeping has been a very innovative community. It's been a community that's been able to come up with totally new methods
Hmm.
for raising these animals in captivity, and I'm pretty proud of it for doing that.
Yeah.
On the other side, I think that for new ant keepers, resources like Tar Heel ants are incredibly important.
Yep.
Even for established ones. Most of the nests, even though I build exhibits for zoos, right, I have the capability to make really nice nests. I don't necessarily have the time. So a lot of the nests in my professional collection are from Tar Heel ants, and they're of great quality. So
Yeah, they
I
are.
guess I just wanted to get that out there, kind of my thoughts on the value of DIY, but also the value of these professional kind of formicarium suppliers like Tar Heel ants in the United States and antstore.net over in Europe.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I need to contact Mac and see if I can get him on the show. I love his mini hearth. Um,
Yeah, I liked them so much I had to order them over to the UK.
oh man. Do you have any advice for kids who would like to become entomologists?
I have lots of advice, and we actually did a Ask Me Anything at one of the Discords on that very topic. Like I spent like an hour and a half talking all about uh, kids who want to become entomologists. It's so funny that a lot of the questions the community has submitted for this podcast are actually questions we've talked about on our Q&A videos.
Alright.
This is one of them. So, a few things. I'm going to take kids as being high schoolers because that's kind of the audience I'm able to actually talk to about preparing if they want to be entomologists. And what I'll say is, you're going to want to make sure that you are an active member of your community. And that might seem like a surprising and kind of a weird answer, but in all honesty, coming from a university environment and having been on scholarship selection committees and a whole host of different kind of opportunities and experiences that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are going to be successful in academia, in science, are generally folks who, care about working with other people. They have experience working with a community, and they're passionate about what they do. So,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to being active, I also really recommend them to remain curious, try and learn as much as you can. And you don't have to be obsessive about it, but just being curious, kind of maintaining that curiosity. Like, it is no mistake that I start every video on the Ant Network with "Hello, Curious Minds,"
Mm-hmm.
because being curious about the natural world is the key.
Yep.
So, my advice for kids is to be active in the community, seek out ways to lead or at least to engage, and also to learn more about entomology, explore entomology as a broad subject,
Mm-hmm.
get more experience there. And if you're really, really passionate about it, the Entomological Society of America actually accepts student members who are from high schools. And that can be a good way to get more exposure to entomologists. You can attend the national meeting, you can learn more about entomology in general. And I would say for the most passionate kids who want to be entomologists, they feel really strongly, that's a really great resource, even if, by the way, they're not based in the United States. The Entomological Society of America is actually the world's largest entomological community. And we have international meetings as well. And you can also look at the International Congress of Entomology, which we generally refer to as ICE, not to be confused with the US federal agency.
Right. Do you have time for two more questions and then my final question? I know it's already
Let,
3:01.
let's do it.
Okay, so these two are actually DM'd to me, so these were actually sent privately. What place slash region would you've been to say you? Wait, let me read that again. Sorry. Um, what place slash region that you've been to would you say has the most potential for the discovery of any new ant species?
Uh, Definitely Australia.
Hmm.
I went to Australia just as I began my experience with ants, and it remains one of the most fascinating places to study ants and learn more kind of about the diversity of them. There's wide swaths of Australia that haven't been really thoroughly sampled. We're always kind of figuring out that, oh, there's more species here than we knew.
Hmm.
So if I had to choose one place, at least a place that I want to go work and learn more about the ants, it would be Australia. I also would mention, I can't answer that question without also saying that the work that we did in Madagascar really comes to mind because
Hmm.
Madagascar, as kind of a separated island from
Hmm.
Africa, which actually has influences from Asia and Africa,
Hmm.
it has a huge amount of endemic species and a lot of unique ones. But quite a bit of those species, especially the ground nesting ones, have been very thoroughly documented by the Madagascar Biodiversity Center, the California Academy of Sciences, and Brian Fisher.
That's cool. That question was from Ants Montenegro. And the last question from the audience was actually sent to me last night from Luca Haksasi. Miles, do you like Forelius? Forelius.
Borrelia. So these are
Yes.
tiny little desert ants. Sure, they're cute. I've never kept them. I've never found them to have like a story from the natural world that I really want to tell, and that's one of the factors that definitely go into whether or not I'm keeping an ant species
Hmm.
or trying to make a video about them. Uh, I think Forelius are interesting. They're probably a little bit understudied in terms of what they're actually doing in the environment because I see them all the time, particularly in kind of central Arizona.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I like them. They're cute. I've never kept them though.
Cool. And the last question before we close out the show is it's actually one of my favorite questions is how can someone lose their fear of bugs?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's difficult, and sometimes I'll be fair. To be fair to those people, that may not be possible, especially if someone actually has a phobia. Um, but if you are just kind of not super comfortable with insects, as most humans are, uh, exposure is really what does it, and that's a scary answer too. I know, but
Yeah.
being around them and having that, generally they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to do anything other than be interesting. Being around them, being more familiar with insects or ants or whatever it is, that's going to reduce your fear. And at minimum, it'll reduce your kind of fear response where you see one and then you don't want to be around it and you get really uncomfortable. Being around them more is just going to make you more comfortable, being near those animals. And that's definitely been my case. I went into it appreciating ants a lot, but not necessarily having a deep appreciation for other insects or arthropods. And I started out kind of in entomology, really not being particularly enthusiastic about spiders. And now I have a pet tarantula. So,
Well,
um, it can be done, but I would say really that exposure is what will make you more comfortable.
mm-hmm.
And if the exposure is not being, it may not be in person, it might be that you're watching more videos about them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but kind of just seeing them, understanding them, seeing them not hurting people definitely helps. And that's one of the reasons I try and look for the real drama of the natural world rather than creating my own.
Right.
And that's been kind of a theme along some of the questions here, is really letting the natural world be interesting and remaining curious about it without kind of creating artificial scenarios. So if you want to talk about certain YouTubers, or if you want to talk about the unfortunate antics on TikTok, that all kind of revolves around,
Mm-hmm.
are we going to create artificial drama or appreciate the natural world for the dramatic and interesting place that it is?
Correct. Well, Miles, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. Is there anything else you would like to plug? Any of your socials you would like to plug before we end the show?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm glad I was able to join you guys and talk a little bit more about this stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate what you're doing with the podcast and where you're trying to go with it. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important that we have kind of more vocal leadership within the community, and it's great to see you guys kind of getting organized. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of the handiwork at myself, you can follow me. I am at Miles Maxcer on pretty much all the platforms. We may launch a TikTok at some point. I'll keep you informed on that.
That'd be fun.
I don't know.
No live
But
feeding
otherwise,
guaranteed.
yeah, not guaranteed. But otherwise, make sure you are subscribed to the Ant Network on YouTube. It's incredible. We have a lot of viewers on the Ant Network, but still about 50% of them are not subscribed. And yet we know that quite a few of them still come back to watch. That subscriber count and the engagement with our videos really helps us rank in the YouTube algorithm. And if you care about getting, accurate, trustworthy, and at least in my opinion, kind of well-made ant keeping content out there, supporting those creators by subscribing and liking and engaging with their videos will help us rise in the rankings and get discovered. So if maybe not your favorite YouTubers are the ones being found with ant keeping, there are things that you can do actually to influence that, and we always appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and close. Do you need to go, Miles, or you good to hang around?
Yep. I can hang around with you guys for a couple more minutes, but then I got to get going here.
That's right. Sounds good.
The projects do not end.
Right. All right. So next time on Formicast Podcast, next interview we have is Ants on the Rock on May 30th. It's gonna be live on YouTube. So for all those who are listening and watching when this comes out, get your questions in now. Go to the Discord and leave a question for Ants on the Rock right now. Next Ant Quest, we're doing a raffle starting the 14th of June for the next Ant Quest. However, we're not going to be doing an Ant Quest episode right away. We got some other stuff planned. We have an interview with Ender Ants coming up as well, which just found out this morning that he is interested in coming on the show this month. We're also doing a We Don't Approve episode, so we're going to be bringing on probably Aesthetic Ants and some others in the community that is part of the movement, and we're going to be talking about the gel farms. We're going to be talking about the live feedings on social media, and definitely about the illegal sale of ants, especially across borders in the United States and probably all across the world. I mean, the United States is a little bit stricter than other parts of the world, but it's still important. We're also planning on getting an interview with the Daily Ant talking about spiny ants, since that's the species of ants he studies. And I reached out to Terry Miller by Formica to bring him on the show as well. So that's pretty much it for this episode. JB, do you want to plug your stuff?
Well, the best thing to do is to check out the website, which is thecolonialist.co.uk. In there, you'll find links to everyone. In fact, if you're happy with it, I'll add the Ant Network links into the website, into the blog as well. And you guys can just click through there and you'll find myself, you'll find anything about the Formicast, you'll find the other Antcast or any other YouTubers you may be interested.
Sweet. And for all those who are listening, you can also find me, Formicast, on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and that's pretty much it. All right, folks, Formicast out.
See you later.